Hello, I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York with breaking news. A top Trump national security official is stepping down over the Iran war. Joe Kent, director of the National Counterterrorism Center, says, quote, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel. That seismic resignation as we are seeing escalation in the Middle East. Israel now claims to have taken out a pair of top Iranian military leaders, while Tehran hits key energy facilities across the Gulf and targets the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, all as the Strait of Hormuz remains static, driving oil prices back up above $100 a barrel. But President Trump still insists other nations will step in to help safeguard the strait.
Numerous countries have told me they're on the way. Some are very enthusiastic about it. I'm almost doing it in some cases, not because we need them, but because I want to find out how they react.
Well, so far, we've seen some of America's closest allies reject Trump's request. Let's bring in MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian, MS Now International reporter Inez de la Cuetara in Jerusalem. Also with us, MS Now contributor and New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker, our national security and intel analyst, former CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos, and foreign policy journalist Laura Rosen. Ken, let's start with this big resignation. We saw a number of intelligence and military officials break with Trump in his first term. How significant is this now from Joe Kent?
Good morning, Anna. Well, this is hugely significant because Joe Kent represents a wing of the MAGA movement that is incredibly disenchanted with this war in Iran. You're seeing it on social media, but now you're seeing an actual resignation by a senior member of the administration. The National Counterterrorism Center is a very important agency, particularly at a time when the threat level from the Iran war has been heightened. And we've seen, for example, ISIS-inspired attacks and attacks on synagogues in recent days. And Joe Kent has always been a controversial figure. He was a veteran of the Army Special Forces, and he really represented that sort of non-interventionist wing of the MAGA movement. And also to allege it publicly that essentially the U.S. was goaded into this war because of the Israel lobby, that is a huge statement. It's a controversial statement. There are people, there are MAGA supporters who have made that allegation, of course, that said that essentially Israel jammed the Trump administration into doing this because Israel was going to attack. And Donald Trump even made some statements that made people think that that could have been a possibility. He later walked them back. Trump officials have said, look, this is a joint operation with Israel. They are hand in glove. They are together with the same strategic objectives here. But to have Joe Kent walk away and publicly essentially accuse Israel of drawing the United States into a war and to proclaim that there's no imminent threat, and he sees all the intelligence, by the way, that is a huge, huge deal on him.
Yeah, and he writes, and I think this is important context, too, in terms of his decision and how perhaps earth-shattering it may be in this country. As a veteran who deployed to combat 11 times and as a Gold Star husband who lost my beloved wife Shannon in a war manufactured by Israel, I cannot support sending the next generation off to fight and die in a war that serves no benefit to the American people nor justifies the cost of American lives. Again, Ken, this is the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. What are the national security implications of this?
Well, look, we should add, though, that Joe Kent has always been kind of a fringy figure in the administration, and he works for Tulsi Gabbard, who has sort of marginalized herself in terms of foreign policy. Remember, she was totally iced out of the Venezuela operation because she has always been a non-interventionist. She's a former Democrat, and she's made some incredibly controversial statements, as has Joe Kent, not really part of the mainstream foreign policy establishment or even the mainstream Republican or even the mainstream MAGA foreign policy thinking. But in terms of the national security implications, it's a huge deal that essentially the National Counterterrorism Center is rudderless at the moment. Again, at a time when there is an elevated terrorist threat. The NCTC was created after 9/11 to fuse domestic and foreign intelligence. It's the only agency where analysts sit at their desks with computers that get both CIA reporting from overseas and FBI case information from home, because there's supposed to be a wall between those things. We don't want the CIA spying on Americans, but we created this agency so that we could sift through things that were lost. Remember, the dots that weren't connected during 9/11. And so the idea that this agency is now rudderless without a permanent leader it could bode not very well for national security at the moment, Anna.
Ken Dilanian, thank you. Mark, let me get your reaction to this.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary. You know, Joe Kent is someone who actually worked at the CIA as well. He was a paramilitary officer, very well respected. This is before his political career. And as he noted in his resignation letter, he lost his wife in the global war on terrorism. So it was a tragic story. He then ran for Congress several times, certainly became part of the MAGA movement, very much, a hard right. And then when he went to NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center, he did so, I think, because of his, his close relationship with Tulsi Gabbard. And so with this, inflammatory resignation, and of course, Ken's right, the comments on Israel, I mean, I think we should probably expect Joe Kent to be on Tucker Carlson soon. But I do think this also poses the question of what's Tulsi Gabbard's future in this, too, because Joe was very close to her. This clearly he would have done, not necessarily in concert with her, he would have told her, of course. So I wonder if she's on the way out as well, because we have seen tensions within the national security world, for example, between the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, and Tulsi Gabbard. And then, the final point on this, too, is that, as Ken noted, this is the schism in the MAGA movement. And I think this is now going to be more acceptable for many people to come out and say, well, look, the head of NCTC just resigned. This war is a problem. I'm sure President Trump is not happy today. He campaigned for and was very supportive of Joe Kent. So this is quite a blow.
Yeah, and this is interesting timing, Peter, considering Kent's boss, DNI Tulsi Gabbard, will be in front of Congress tomorrow. And Gabbard's been really silent during this war so far.
Yeah, it's actually very striking because, as we've been talking about, she also has been very skeptical of aggression on Iran. She put out a video just last year from her office saying that people wanted to drive the United States into a terrible war against Iran that shouldn't happen. And she hasn't been saying much at all lately. I think that she's been on the outs, or seen as on the outs with the White House for quite a while. They've now sort of repurposed her into an election denial, investigator. Rather than, the external threats that have been, traditionally at the core of that job, the director of national intelligence. But it does raise questions where she is at this point. It'll be fascinating to see what she says under oath.
And again, this is somebody resigning who was a Trump true believer all along. We've seen other resignations and some firings of people who didn't drink the MAGA Kool-Aid, for lack of a better term. Peter, could this set off more resignations?
Yeah, I think you're right to make that point. This is not a career person objecting to the Trumpian philosophy or the Trumpian way of doing business, as we've seen time and time again over the last year at the FBI, at Justice, at other agencies and so forth. This is a Trump ally. This is one of the MAGA champions. He's a conspiracy theorist, or at least has advanced conspiracy theories involving the 2020 election, involving the January 6th. He's been associated at times with some of the, far-right white supremacist groups. He's distanced himself from them since then. He was the tool of Trump's revenge against a Republican congresswoman who voted for his second impeachment. Joe Kent took her out in a primary, though he lost in the general election. So he's not a career person in the sense that we've seen people step down out of objections to Trump. He's objecting to Trump from the Trumpian point of view, from the point of view of this is what Trump said he would not do when he ran for office. He said he would not get us into new wars. And he definitely is sort of in the Tucker Carlson side of the MAGA spectrum at the moment.
Laura, this is an official statement. The whole world gets to see it. What message does this send to America's allies about the U.S. and Israel's war with Iran?
Well, the Iranians, for one, have been watching the public dismay with the war and gas prices going up, and they see that as an effective lever against the Trump administration to try to pressure it to sue for peace. And we've seen Trump not being very interested to do that. We saw the Iranian foreign minister yesterday deny that he had been in contact with Trump's envoy about a ceasefire proposal, and saying that, the Trump administration is just trying to say we're talking to calm oil markets, to manipulate the oil prices. So they're watching the U.S. public be dismayed.
Let's turn to Inez in Jerusalem, because Iran has been hitting more energy infrastructure in the Gulf, while Israel says they've now taken out 2 top Iranian military officials. Inez, what more have you learned about these intense new attacks by both sides?
Yeah, Anna, some big news there with the IDF announcing it had taken out two important officials within the Iranian regime, including Ari Larijani, who was a top security official. The IDF had announced that it was launching a fresh wave of strikes on Iran, specifically on Tehran. We thought they were focusing on ballistic missile production facilities. Then they said they had been targeting Ari Larijani, and then it was the Israeli defense minister who announced this morning that the strike had been successful. So he becomes the second kind of most important figure within the Iranian regime to be taken out after the late supreme leader, of course, who was taken out on the first day. The other figure they took out was the head of the Basij force. So that is a paramilitary volunteer militia. Both Larijani and the head of the Basij force were instrumental in trying to crack down on protests. And we've heard from the Israelis time and time again that they want to see regime change, that regime change has to come from within. They've said they are creating the conditions for the people of Iran to topple their regime. And certainly with these strikes, it seems like they're doing that because these are two figures that would have been key to cracking down on any potential uprising.
We've got some breaking news. The House Oversight Committee has just subpoenaed Attorney General Pam Bondi to appear for a deposition over the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files. MS Now's Michael Chanel joins us now. Tell us what just happened here, Michael.
Yeah, Chris, so officially the House Oversight Committee has sent a subpoena to Attorney General Pam Bondi requesting her testimony as part of the panel's investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. This comes after 2 weeks ago tomorrow, so just under 2 weeks ago, the House Oversight Committee had, in a surprise move, voted to subpoena Attorney General Pam Bondi. The vote was 24-19, with 5 Republicans crossing the aisle and joining Democrats in favor of that subpoena. It comes as there have been a lot of questions about the handling of the release of the Epstein files. There have been bipartisan criticism of how the DOJ, and by that, a byproduct, how Attorney General Pam Bondi has handled that, particularly with those redactions, right? Names of rich and powerful individuals have been redacted in various releases of the documents, while as names of victims and their information have been left out for the public to see. There are also a number of questions of just how many of the documents have been released. Some estimates have said that the DOJ has around 6 million documents in its possession. Just about 3.5 million have been released. So lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have been clamoring to ask Attorney General Pam Bondi about those matters and more. Back earlier this month, they voted to subpoena her, and today that subpoena officially went out. Now, when this deposition will happen, that still remains to be seen. We'll now get into the phase of this process where there are negotiations between the DOJ and the Oversight Committee to find a time that works for the both of them. But it is plausible that in the near future, we could see Attorney General Pam Bondi meet with the Oversight Committee behind closed doors to field questions about Epstein investigations, the Epstein documents, and more, which has just been such a focus and such a big conversation up here on Capitol Hill.
Michael Chanel, thank you for that breaking news.
Let's just go back down Epstein memory lane for a second. Right. First, she gave the binders to the influencers. Then the list was on her desk. Then there was no list, maybe no desk, in fact. OK, then it went. then it went from, right, this is a Democratic hoax. We can't release any of this. They told Republicans not to sign on to the bill. If they signed on to it, it was a hostile act against the White House. Then they brought Republican members into the Situation Room, you know, the place like where we go to war. Right, and basically promised them things in their district, threatened them. Pam Bondi was in those meetings, okay, in the Situation Room. And so, you know, let's not have the most transparent, administration in American history. They tried to cover this up and keep this from ever coming out. And it only was because Congress pushed it on them that we are where we are. Look, that being said, I find it interesting that Comer's doing this in a deposition. What, he doesn't want a public hearing? What, the last one didn't go well for her? Okay, so we'll have to see how this all goes down. I'm happy to help Comer out. Okay, I'm happy to help Comer out.
Wait, but let's stay on this point about why they're choosing to do this behind closed doors, because in the past, part of the sort of rationale for doing it behind closed doors is let's see what you have and what information you're willing to give us.
No, they're hiding her now.
Correct.
Yeah, they're hiding her now.
And so then what happens, right? Because if she goes in and plays the same game in private that she has played in public, where it becomes, her burn book, her reading off accusations about anyone who deigns to ask her a question, well, that's not really probative. So then what do you do?
Yeah, no. The strategy here is they voted on the subpoena, so they have to do that, okay? And then put her in the deposition without TV cameras, right? This is not oh, maybe she'll change strategy. No, they do not want her to do another hearing. That hearing was a total debacle for them. By the way, now that the Dow is no longer at 50,000, it's at 47,000, can we go after sex predators? Is that can we do that now? Because that was the excuse of why we shouldn't be asking any of these questions. So, look, I don't know what the deposition with her is going to be like. I don't know that she's going to give out any more information. We have a ton of questions, like why are millions of documents still redacted? Why did Ghislaine Maxwell get moved to that minimum security prison?
She's saying in a statement she makes herself available to speak directly with members of Congress.
Oh, I'm sure she does. Okay. I mean, you saw the hearing. The American people saw the hearing. I mean, look, I'll ghostwrite her burn book on James Comer, if we want to make it bipartisan, if that's what she's going to continue to do. Happy to do that. I have some stuff to talk about James. But he's doing her a favor. This is the administration saying you're going to do it in a deposition, you're going to do it in the basement, and there's not going to be any TV cameras based on the debacle of that last hearing.
Is there a legal difference in terms, because I just, when I first heard about the Pam Bondi subpoena, all I thought about was John Mitchell, who was Nixon's attorney general, obviously, in 1975. He was convicted. He went to jail. He served about, 18 months? But he was convicted on obstruction, perjury, I think conspiracy, obstruction of justice, perjury, conspiracy. Is there obviously when she's before Congress, she is under oath. And so there is a duty of her for her not to lie to Congress. We don't want to hurt her. She doesn't want to perjure herself. Is there a different legal jeopardy for her in this deposition?
No,
or is it the same situation?
Same situation. She'll be under oath. But look, we already had Kash Patel lie in Congress on this issue, right?
Is he going to go to jail?
I don't know. We'll have to figure that out once we get the gavel in November when we win elections. But we should definitely look into that. I mean, he came to a committee and said Donald Trump's name is in the Epstein files less than 100 times. He said Epstein only trafficked girls to himself. There was nobody else. We know that's not true, right? Because we got the list of co-conspirators. So they already said stuff in the hearings that turned out not to be true. Kristi Noem, I think, perjured herself in the hearing the other day on the fact that, these contracts and whether she had any knowledge of it or whether Corey was involved. So, we'll have to see what Pam says in the deposition. This allows the Republicans in the middle of the deposition to come out to the TV cameras and frame what is happening in the room before we get to see any of the transcript. That's why they like to do this. It allows them to come out and kind of frame the narrative rather than the American people seeing it with their own eyes and listening it, with their ears. The Judiciary Committee was such, I think, a debacle for the Attorney General that there's just no way the Republicans are going to put her in that situation again.
But that works. Which brings me back to my first question. What's the point of tomorrow? What is the point of any of this if it's going to be done this way? What is the expectation? The Republicans are going to come out and they're going to frame it. They're going to say, hey, this is what it is. This is what it was. This is how it's always been. What is the opposition's approach to tomorrow?
And why are they being briefed tomorrow?
And why are they being briefed tomorrow? And what? Because this, again, the administration don't want to talk about Epstein. They don't want to talk about any of this. They don't want to talk about none of it. And we know that. And so if they have the advantage of being able to shape the conversation by whatever formal mechanism, a subpoena hearing or whatever in a closed room with no cameras, then coming out to the mics, what's your counterplay, bro? What do you guys do? Because you're swimming against a tide where they're already out to sea.
Yeah, I think the reason why they're coming to do that briefing is we've seen the administration do it. Noem just did it. Noem released billions of dollars in money she was holding in DHS for a whole year, 2 days before she appeared in front of the Senate. Then she released money for North Carolina because she was getting questioned by Tom Tillis. This is DOJ's trying to go in and get some stuff out of the way before she winds up into that deposition on the 14th. Look, I think Democratic members need to hammer her in that deposition. Okay, this cannot be a lot of these depositions where it's very cordial, it's very nice. No, they need to hammer her in that deposition. Okay, and not just let staff do the questioning. So a lot of these depositions, it's Democratic staff versus Republican staff. The members need to step up. The members need to come with the specific questions and get her to figure out why did you do this then versus now? Why did you do that then versus now? Why did Kash Patel say this under oath? Right? Why did you say this when it wasn't true? Why did you say the list was on your desk? What list was on your desk Did you misspeak when you said that?
And to your point, was there a desk? You referenced the thing that she said about, well, we shouldn't even be asking me these questions. Look at where the Dow is. Today on CNBC, Kevin Hassett had to say this about what a prolonged war with Iran could mean for the American economy. Take a listen.
If it were to be extended, it wouldn't really disrupt the U.S. economy very much at all. It would hurt consumers, and we'd have to think about, if that continued, what we would have to do about that. But that's like really the last of our concerns right now.
Wait. Are consumers not part of the U.S. economy?
Oh, Kevin.
The consumers are the last of their concerns right now. It's like, this comm shop, they don't, it's a tough day at work every day.
I mean, you're looking at me. These were the people who said affordability was a hoax for a couple of months until someone showed the president the polling on that, right? And so, look, the American people are paying 70 cents more per gallon at the gas pump. Airline prices are going up 30% because the fuel costs are going to be just passed on to the American people. You're going to see food costs go up because all the transportation of food, right, is all that fuel costs are going to be passed on to the American people. So I don't know the administration wants to get back to the talking point of, hey, prices don't matter. It's a hoax. Everything's just going to be fine. Pay no attention when you get the bill in the mail or when you get the bill at the grocery store or the bill at the pump. That's not going to work. It didn't work for them when they were trying it a couple months ago. By the way, it didn't work for Democrats when we were trying to tell people, don't pay attention to the economy, Bidenomics, everything is great. You can't tell people how to feel when they see they can't afford to live. But hey, look, let them try it. Let that be the message all the way to November. Okay, Kevin, keep at that.
Donald Trump is now claiming that his war got, a surprise endorsement from a former president.
Look, for 47 years, no president was willing to do what I'm doing, and they should have done it a long time ago. It would have been a lot easier. There's no president that wanted to do it, and yet every president knew. I've spoken to a certain president, who I like, actually, a past president, former president. He said, I wish I did it. I wish I did, but they didn't do it. I'm doing it, yeah. I can't tell you that. I don't want to embarrass him. It would be very bad for his career, even though he's got no career left.
Okay, a lot packed in there. Trump says a former president wishes he would have started this war with Iran. The former president is so jealous, he wishes he could have been as powerful and bold as Donald Trump. Wishes he could have been the one to plunge the United States into an open-ended conflict with a country of 93 million people without feeling really the responsibility at all to think through any of the consequences, as Trump has not thought through. Of course, Trump can't say which president it is because that would, quote, embarrass him, though apparently he likes this person. There you go. But look, here's the thing. There are only 4 former U.S. presidents still living on this earth. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. That's it. Those 4. There they are. Now, Emma's now reached out to spokespeople for Presidents Clinton, Obama, and Biden, all of whom confirmed that they have not had any recent conversations with Donald Trump about Iran. And the Wall Street Journal has confirmed through a spokesperson that President Bush also did not have a conversation with Trump about Iran. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. None of them had a conversation with Donald Trump. So why is Donald Trump claiming that a former president told him he was super jealous of Trump's war? Is the current president lying? I mean, entirely possible. Is he confused? Is he both lying and confused? I mean, my gut is really on option C, as in both, but honestly, we don't know. What we do know is that this whole weird lying about a conversation with a former president episode is part of a pattern. This is not a one-off. Every day, Trump seems to say something about this war that is directly contradicted by reporting. I mean, for instance, just yesterday, Donald Trump repeatedly claimed that prior to the start of the war, nobody in his administration knew that Iran might respond by attacking U.S. allied Gulf nations. In fact, they were shocked.
They weren't supposed to go after all these other countries in the Middle East. So they hit Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. Nobody expected that. We were shocked.
You said they hit Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. Nobody expected that. We were shocked. Are you surprised that nobody briefed you ahead of time that might be their retaliation?
Nobody, no. The greatest experts, nobody thought they were going to hit They were, I wouldn't say friendly countries. They were like neutral. They lived with them for years.
There's Peter Doocy again asking really good questions. Look, here's what Trump said. Nobody knew. Nobody thought they were going to hit those countries. Peter asked him if he was angry he wasn't briefed on it. And right on cue, here was the headline, of course, from Reuters last night. Here's what it said, quote, Trump was warned of likely Iranian retaliation on Gulf allies, sources say. They absolutely did know that Iran would attack those Gulf countries. It would have been a natural part of any briefing. But Trump claims they were all shocked. Another example? I have more. Here was Donald Trump yesterday talking about the possibility that Iran has placed mines in the Strait of Hormuz.
We hit, to the best of our knowledge, all of their mine-laying ships. Now they can put them on other types of ships, I guess, and drop them in. But we don't know that any have even been dropped in. We're not sure that any have been. We don't know that they have dropped any in. You know, we don't know if they even set any mines. They may have no mines set.
He says that the U.S. government does not know if Iran is laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. He says there may be no mines set, none whatsoever. It's a mystery. It's a mystery to Trump. Of course, it's really not a mystery at all. I mean, here's the headline from the New York Times. U.S. officials say Iran is laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. officials. Now, according to the Times, we do know the answer to this question, and that's according to U.S. officials. And the answer is yes, Iran is absolutely laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. And it's not just the reporting that is contradicting Trump these days, it's also his own officials. I mean, the very people he installed in this government, many of them were sources for all those stories. Now, when Trump took office, he made two big, alarming personnel decisions at the Office of National Intelligence. He made Tulsi Gabbard his director of national intelligence, and he made this guy, Joe Kent, the director of America's National Counterterrorism Center. And Joe Kent was not some kind of career bureaucrat with a long history of intelligence work, or really a person with a history of any intelligence work whatsoever. He was a twice-failed MAGA congressional candidate who had a history of associating with far-right figures and peddling debunked January 6 conspiracies. He was a loyal member of what you might call the Tucker Carlson wing of the MAGA movement. So loyal that he reportedly ordered an analyst to write an intelligence assessment about the relationship between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago to better align with the whims of the president. Well, today, that guy, Joe Kent, officially resigned from the Trump administration, citing the president's war in Iran as the reason for his departure. Trump was then asked about Kent's resignation in the Oval Office, and this is what he said.
I always thought he was weak on security, very weak on security. It's a good thing that he's out.
I always thought he was weak on security. It's a good thing he was out, says the guy who appointed Joe Kent to a top national security post last year. Look, the most striking thing to me about Joe Kent's resignation is not that he was unqualified for the job. We knew that, and that applies across many people Trump has appointed. But that this is yet another real sign of the enormous cracks within Trump's party over the Iran war. It's also a sign that Trump isn't telling the truth about the reason for this war. I mean, in his public resignation letter, Kent wrote this: I cannot in good conscience support this ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. And yes, that directly contradicts what Trump himself has been saying about why he plunged the U.S. into this war in the first place. The idea that Iran posed an imminent threat to the U.S. is key. It's been key to Trump's legal basis for starting this war in the first place. But formerly MAGA Joe Kent, for all his faults, and he has many, was still somehow a top intelligence official with access to high-level intelligence. And he says there was no imminent threat from Iran. Now, after Kent announced his resignation, his boss, Tulsi Gabbard, quickly issued a statement in what looked like quite an effort to save face with Donald Trump. She wrote, quote, as our commander-in-chief, Trump is responsible for determining what is and is not an imminent threat. It's worth remembering here that Tulsi Gabbard was also supposed to be part of the anti-war wing of Trump's MAGA coalition. Remember that? I mean, in fact, back in 2020, when Gabbard still called herself a Democrat, she criticized the Trump administration's strike on Iranian General Soleimani, specifically on the grounds that Iran posed no imminent threat to America at the time. She wrote on Twitter, the attack was imminent, but we didn't know when and we didn't know where. Well, if you don't know when and if you don't know where, that is not imminent. And then signed it with the hashtag no war with Iran. That was not that long ago, Tulsi Gabbard. So 2020, Tulsi thought that President Trump did not do enough to spell out the imminent threat from Iran. But 2026, Tulsi thinks Trump alone gets to decide what is and is not an imminent threat, which I would note contradicts what her now former close advisor, Joe Kent, said in his own resignation statement today. I mean, for Tulsi, it's just like another one in a line of embarrassing reversals. And while we don't know why she put the statement out today or what exactly prompted her complete about-face, I suspect it has a whole lot to do with keeping Trump happy the day that one of her closest advisors resigned and called him out publicly so that she can keep her job. It's also the perfect encapsulation of the Trump administration's approach to this war, because Trump is essentially waging a war based on pure vibes. I mean, it doesn't matter what the intelligence says or what senior officials tell the president. The only thing that matters is how Trump feels at any given moment. And at this point, Trump and his lackeys have no problem admitting this is all about Trump's big, big feelings.
They were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that.
I think the president, prior to that phone call, had a good feeling that the Iranian regime was going to strike the United States assets.
We took a little excursion because we felt we had to do that to get rid of some evil.
The president had a feeling, again, based on fact, that Iran was going to strike the United States.
But I felt it was something we had to do.
Because he felt as though Iran was going to strike the United States.
The president feels we have the inalienable right to stop you.
When are you going to know when it's over? When I feel it. They should be very thankful that this group of people feels the way we do.
The president felt that he had to strike first to prevent those mass casualties.
Donald Trump has a feeling. He's had a lot of feelings. And the only cure for those feelings seems to be more war. From day one, it has been Trump's feelings and vibes dictating U.S. strategy in this conflict. And all the experts have seemingly been sidelined in favor of Trump's feelings. Who knew he had so many feelings? He doesn't about so many other issues. Now, Trump calls this war a little excursion and says it will take only 4 to 5 weeks. But just yesterday, Axios reported that sources both in the administration and in allied countries believe the war could last until September. That's another 6 months. Trump says he got everything under control in the Strait of Hormuz and that oil prices will come tumbling down once the war is over. But today, Notice reports that most of the State Department experts in charge of dealing with a Middle East gas crisis were fired during the Trump administration's DOGE spurs last year. And that is all while gas prices have surged 27% on average across the country since Trump decided to strike Iran. It's also clear Trump and his cabinet have no idea what is happening day to day in this war. I mean, just watch what happened when Trump was asked about an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad earlier today.
Mr. President, how do you respond to the increased attacks by the Iraqi militia groups against the U.S. Embassy and consulate in the Kurdistan region?
You want to answer that?
Yeah.
You want to?
Yeah, well, Marco, obviously the Secretary of State, has control over the embassy. Look, there have been a lot of militia attacks against our base or our embassy in Iran.
So Trump was asked about U.S. embassy attacks in Iraq, and he dodges the question by kicking it to J.D. Vance, who then tries to kick the question to Marco Rubio before saying there have been a lot of attacks against our embassy in Iran. Now, I would just note, in the U.S. embassy in Iran has been closed for over 40 years. There's no active U.S. embassy in Iran. And it shouldn't, overall, though, have been difficult for a single person in that room to answer a question about attacks on a U.S. embassy. But it was punting from one person to the other. It's not particularly surprising either. I mean, for the last 17 days, the same group of people have been either lying, evading, or guessing about what is happening in the war they started. And now even some of their own loyalists are headed for the exits. So where does that leave us? Well, here was another telling moment from the President of the United States today.
The Iranian regime has told Sky News, if you put boots on the ground in Iran, it will be another Vietnam. Are you afraid of that?
No, I'm really not afraid of anything.
That makes one of us.
Does the administration really have the ability to do that as well right now?
Well, again, it wouldn't be a military thing. I think it would be essentially collaborative or cooperative to a large extent. It would involve economic tools, a lot of diplomacy. I don't think it would be in conflict, if you will, or, excuse me, it wouldn't be impossible to do this. whatever we choose to do in Iran, whether we continue militarily, find a way to end things, I don't see the things essentially fighting over the same resources.
All right, let's talk about Iran. Stephen, I just read a number of the headlines. None of them are good. Donald Trump appears to be wading into a quagmire here, and we use quagmire intentionally. What are the options right now?
Well, the failure to secure the Strait of Hormuz right away at the opening of this conflict is a big mystery of this war. I think that the president believed the shock and awe, to refer to another war in the Middle East, he believed that that would lead to the crumbling of the regime very, very quickly. So there wasn't a lot in this plan, apparently, in order to do something that the regime had threatened to do over many years, which is to, if Iran was attacked and the regime threatened that the Iranians would close the strait. So now we're confronted with a situation where we're trying to crack it open militarily, and it's going to take weeks to do that kind of thing. The attack on Karg Island was a suggestion that perhaps the president wanted to hold Iran's own oil resources hostage. But of course, he's the one who has campaigned on low gas prices for Americans. He doesn't want to tank the economy that he has been touting, whether it's true or not that he's been wonderful for the American economy or not. To blockade Iran's oil would do more damage to American consumers.
How does the United States get out of this? I mean, the reporting that we've seen is that the regime is now more entrenched and potentially much more hardline than even the past Ayatollah, that his son is actually much more extreme. So if part of it was regime change or just even never allowing them to have a nuke again, how does the administration untangle themselves from this war? Or in order to reach the goal of never allowing them to have a nuke, are they going to be forced, Stephen, to send in ground troops to try to seize the enriched uranium, to try to do what it can to make sure that the ability to produce a weapon is no longer in the hands of the Iranians?
Well, Katie, there's a reason why previous presidents confronted with this problem chose not to do what President Trump has done, given the difficulties associated with regime change or whatever the other 7 objectives the president has laid out. I think he's given himself a fair amount of room for maneuver so that if regime change isn't in the offing, he can say that they have degraded the regime and changed its behavior. But what you're pointing to is the fact that should their regime change fail, or should the Islamic regime collapse, but some new, fiercer kind of dictatorship emerge, the logical thing for those leaders to do is to make a dash for a nuclear weapon, the ultimate source of regime security. So this is the kind of problem that the president has created for himself where, again, if not successful here, we'll have to keep going back and going back and going back to try to contain the Iranians who would be, as I said, racing towards a nuclear weapon.
Which is a version of a forever war. It also shows, Richard, the disconnect between the American goals and the Israeli goals, because the Israelis have not deviated from the goal of regime change, and they're still saying it even today. Benjamin Netanyahu is saying it, and they're going out and they're still trying to kill as many of the regime's leaders as they can, and killing Larijani today. Given the disconnect, what does that mean for this country? So even if Donald Trump wanted to get out tomorrow and made up a reason to say that he was successful and pulled out, could he, with the Israelis still on the move?
Katie, you're right. There's a divergence between Israeli and American war aims. It's probably all along, certainly at this point. And if we're interested ever in negotiating an agreement with some Iranian or rump Iranian government, continuing to kill people is not the way to go about it. We've already discredited negotiations by having twice launched wars against Iran in the midst of negotiations. That said, if the United States wants to end this, all it will take is a phone call from Donald Trump to Bibi Netanyahu. Think about it. Bibi Netanyahu has an election this year. His strongest calling card politically is that he has forged a close relationship with Donald Trump, better than any Israeli prime minister's ever had with any American president. I don't think he can afford to alienate Trump if Trump wants to end the war. And who is he going to appeal to in the United States? He could do an end run around Donald Trump to whom? The Democrats certainly aren't going to get closer to him. So actually, I think Donald Trump has enormous leverage here. He leaned on Bibi Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire in Gaza that brought the final Israeli hostages home. So that's the least of our problems. I think the real question is, can we find people in Iran willing and able to negotiate an end to this war on terms that both sides can live with? That's an infinitely more difficult and bigger question than working out anything with Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, and the leverage, that Iran has is the Strait of Hormuz. So if they're not getting a deal that they like, they can continue to choke off the strait, which they have been doing. And on that note, it's been affecting the global economy, the economy here at home. Gas prices are up. Let's play Kevin Hassett talking about that fact today.
But the fact is that the U.S. economy is fundamentally sound, and that if it were to be extended, it wouldn't really disrupt the U.S. economy very much at all. It would hurt consumers, and we'd have to think about, if that continued, what we would have to do about that. But that's really the last of our concerns right now, because we're very confident that this thing is going ahead of schedule.
So they're not thinking about consumers. The last thing they're thinking about is consumers, not the greatest choice of words. And I'm sure that Kevin Hassett's probably regretting that today. But it does reveal something about the administration's thinking regarding this war, Justin.
Yeah, look, there's the difference here between macroeconomics and microeconomics. What Happy Kevin was just doing was doing macroeconomics, what happens to the country as a whole. And it's true that we basically produce as much oil as we need. So when the oil price goes up, on average, America is neither better nor worse off. The consumer's comment, though, is the heart of the matter, which is, how is it that you and I are paying more at the tank, yet the country as a whole is neither better nor worse off? And it's because this is a massive redistribution. High oil prices and therefore high gas prices are a big redistribution from customers, consumers, folks like you and I live in the Midwest, we have to drive everywhere, to those who benefit from selling oil, which is to say oil companies. So if you think that shifting hundreds of millions of dollars across to oil companies and out of the pockets of mums and dads is neutral, then you think there's nothing going on here. If you have a heart and you have a brain instead, you think this is actually going to be a big deal here.
Yeah. I want to go back to Cuba, because I guess I just am surprised, Richard, that you don't think the idea that of Cuba, us getting involved in Cuba right now while we're in the middle of a conflict in Iran, and there's so much. I just am surprised that you're not a little more skeptical of our ability to do anything easily there, to negotiate easily, to have an easy transitional government, to make life better. Explain why you're so much more assured than I am.
Because I don't think what we would do in Cuba would be all that ambitious or intrusive. That's why I think the Venezuela model is better than the Iran model. It would not be confrontational. We're not going to try to remake the country. It wouldn't require nation building. What I think we're looking at is something fairly modest. Again, we would have investment, tourism, and so forth. We'd avoid a massive flood of refugees. And, we wouldn't try to remake Cuba with American boots on the ground. Again, I think it would be pretty hands off, and I think it would be seen as moving Cuba in a better direction. Katie, can I come back just for what Kevin Hassett was saying?
Yeah, of course.
Just to take issue with two things about it. One is the idea that you could be so sanguine about the economy. It's also food prices because of fertilizer. We've got to trade with the rest of the world. See, the idea that the American economy can be this oasis in a world that's suffering big time because oil's at $100 or $150 a barrel is not the way the American economy works. We have trading partners and the rest. Also means American businesses are going to slow down making decisions because of all the uncertainty, almost like COVID slowed down a lot of things. Second of all, if the war continues, we shouldn't assume it necessarily continues in its current form. What happens if it escalates? What happens if a desperate Iran at some point moves against the oil facilities of a Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or a Kuwait or the UAE, much more than they've done so far? One of the things you learn in the Middle East is bad situations can always get worse. So I get nervous when administration officials say we're on schedule, ahead of schedule, things are working out just fine. I wouldn't believe that for a minute.
Justin, bounce off that.
Yeah, look, I loved the fact Richard jumped into my economics lane. I'm going to go over and jump in his foreign affairs lane. And I want to try and explain, Katie, why it is you and he see the world a little differently. And I think there's really something important here. Richard's a much better foreign relations guy than I am, and he's used to moving the chess pieces around the board and all of that. And in a normal administration, the first thing I'd do is I'd call Richard Haas and ask him what he thought. What he left out of any of his comments was any mention of one word: competence. And the moment you have doubts about the competence of an administration to move the right chess piece, to move at the right time, then all of this goes apart. And so what I want to do is put his optimism about Cuba next to the reality of the trade war we just saw play out, a trade war in which it took the administration literally 11 months to realize that tariffs on bananas were not going to bring banana factories back to America, or the Iran invasion in which they forgot to get Americans out of the Middle East. They forgot to buy oil ahead of time. And as far as I can tell, it's one of the most incompetent invasions we've ever seen.
Another significant story we're following: an island-wide blackout hit Cuba yesterday amid that country's deepening energy and economic crisis. All 11 million residents of the island were without power after energy officials reported complete disconnection of the national electrical grid. Only about 5% of the island's power was restored by late last night, with officials warning the fragile grid could fail again. The blackout is Cuba's third major outage in just 4 months, as the government lacks proper funding for repairs, as well as the needed spare parts. Cuba's president recently acknowledged the island has not received oil in 3 months and blamed the outages on the Trump administration's halting of Venezuelan oil shipments after the capture of Nicolas Maduro. President Trump was asked about Cuba yesterday in the White House.
But I think Cuba's the end. You know, all my life I've been hearing about the United States and Cuba. When will the United States do it? I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're a very weakened nation right now.
Soon after those remarks, the New York Times reported the Trump administration is seeking to push Cuba's current president from power. That's according to 4 people familiar with the talks. As the Times notes, the removal would be largely seen as a symbolic move, since Cuba's president is widely considered a figurehead who lacks true political or economic control. The Cuban government declined to comment on the reporting. So, Katie, a couple things here. First of all, I reported a month or so back that Trump was really looking at his foreign policy legacy as toppling 3 regimes: Venezuela, Iran, and then Cuba. And then we have President Trump's remarks yesterday. I mean, they're worth repeating. He says, quote, "I'd have the honor of taking Cuba." And then when pressed, he said, well, free it, take it, doesn't really matter. That's an extraordinary sentiment from a president of the United States about a sovereign nation.
Well, particularly when that president of the United States is embroiled in a war that he's finding it difficult to go out of and that seems to be causing him several headaches. I mean, to still have his eye on Cuba and what he might do in Cuba, and this reporting that what he's thinking of doing is getting rid of the current president, Diaz-Canel, but not necessarily indicting any of the Castros. It sounds like it would just be a sort of figurehead move. And I know that he has said to allies that what he would like to do before he leaves office is not just get rid of those leaders, but actually visit Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela, as kind of putting his metaphysical, if you like, stamp of approval on those countries. But what I find startling is that he is still saying that whilst we are still focused on Iran. I don't know if that is a distraction. I don't know if he still thinks he's going to do that, if he thinks that the cut off of the energy just makes it easy for him to do that. And anyway, if this is just a ceremonial move, you move one president and you keep the regime in place, how much does actually change? And how does that go down with his Cuban supporters in Florida, who actually want something much more substantial than just taking out one person and putting another person in their place?